Hey everyone, welcome to the Unhandled Exception podcast. I'm Dan Clark and this is episode number 64. And that means we've hit another power of 2 with the episode numbers. And this episode is all about GitKraken, which I'm a huge fan of Git. I've used lots of GUIs throughout the years and I've recently started using GitKraken a lot more. And it's a very cool Git client. And I'm pleased to be joined on the show today by Justin Roberts and Eric Amodio from the GitKraken team. So welcome Justin and Eric to the show. Could you both give yourselves a quick intro to the listeners and just tell us a bit about what you do?
You want to go first, Eric?
Sure. I'm Eric Amodio. I've been in dev tools for a while. I worked on the VS Code team, worked on the Git extension on VS Code and a bunch of other things there, VS Code dev. And now, CTO at GitKraken. I also created GitLens, which is a very popular IDE extension for VS Code. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I'm Justin Roberts. I am a senior director of product here at GitKraken. I started my life more on the design side of software, so mostly UI design and kind of some front-end development, and started at Axosoft, which was the original name of our company, right before we started working on GitKraken, actually. So we used to build kind of project management tools in the Jira sphere, and we lost to Jira ultimately, but luckily we kind of pivoted and started building GitKraken. So I've been on that project pretty much since I've been at the company, and it's been really fun to kind of start in the design side and go all the way up through kind of guiding it as a product.
I do find that interesting. Quite a lot of companies do that and they start with one direction and pivot and make a really successful business. What was there was a famous one, I've completely forgotten which company it was, which, not YouTube, something similar to that. Instagram, that was it.
Yeah, there's been a few of them because Slack started that way, right? They were starting to build a game or something and this talking was on the side.
Cool. So before we start talking about GitKraken, I'm just going to do this episode's listener mention. And this one goes out to Richard Whitfield on Twitter. And he tweeted mentioning episode 59, where I was joined by Valentina Shupak chatting about hexagonal architecture. And he tweeted, "Love this episode, both excellent and well communicated knowledge from Valentina and interviewing masterclass from Dan. Great work both." So I was kind of like, interviewing masterclass, I'm not sure that's quite true, but thank you for Richard for saying so. It certainly means a lot. And back in episode 58 with Nick Chapsas, where we were talking about his Dome Chain platform, Nick gave me a few 100% off coupon codes to give away my Docker course, which is on his platform, and he suggested giving that away for listener mentions. So congratulations, Richard. A Docker course is coming your way. And if anyone else wants to get mentioned on this show, just send a social media post about the podcast at mentioning me on any of the socials, and all feedback is greatly appreciated. And don't forget that this podcast has its own Discord community. If you head over to the website unhandledexceptionpodcast.com, you'll see a big shiny Discord link there. Editor Dan here, just to quickly add that the GitKraken team have very kindly offered a GitKraken license to one of the listeners. If you're interested in being included in the raffle, then send a LinkedIn or Twitter post about both the podcast and GitKraken at mentioning me so I know about it, and I'll pick one at random in a few weeks' time. So back to the show. Right, we can now get on with talking about Git, which I'm a huge fan of Git. I've been really looking forward to this, and I think it'd be quite interesting to hit this from different angles. So the listeners are obviously developers, so we can talk about GitKraken as a product. But I think it would also be interesting to talk about your experiences developing a Git client. I think that'd be quite interesting. I guess let's start with it as a product. And I'm going to start with a big open question here. If I were a developer looking for a Git client, why should I pick GitKraken?
I mean, that's a great question. I mean, I think that we are, as far as I can tell, probably the company that is investing the most time and energy into continuously refining what a Git client should be, right? A lot of the other Git clients that are out there are some exceptions, I think, but mostly they're just kind of like off to the side. They're not anyone's main priority. They're just kind of like table stakes for having a Git client, and they just kind of have basic functionality. And we really put a lot of effort into kind of refining the user experience and making Git easier to use, not just simply exposing the functions of Git in an interface.
Yeah, I kind of, in preparation for this episode, I kind of did a mental list, or what I say mental, I've actually written it down, a list of things I like and things I don't like about it. And you'd be glad to know the list I like is a lot bigger. And I can certainly talk about my experiences because I've used Git for many, many years, but I've only recently, I did use GitKraken. I tried it years ago and I didn't stay using it. I can talk about why if you want, but I've recently picked it up again and it stuck this time. So I've been using it for a few months now. I really like it. And I think that one of the reasons is the fact that it integrates so well with other stuff. So I use Azure DevOps, but also like GitHub as well. And the fact that pull requests, I can create them, I can jump to them, I can see information about them. Because I'm not using the cloud workspaces. I don't feel I'm getting all the functionality that I'm sure you get if a team uses the cloud version. And yeah, it'd be good to talk about that as well. But yeah, just being able to like create them and like jump to them from the client is really good. And there's a bunch of stuff, I suppose. We could go through the different things that I personally have stood out, which makes me want to stay with GitKraken. Or we can talk about the different high-level features like these workspaces. Or I actually recently watched your, what was it called? I did make a note of it. Peek into the Palantir. I think that's the is that Lord of the Rings reference.
Yeah.
GitKraken's vision to the future developer experience. That was a good video.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, GitKraken has seen a lot of evolution since we started it. We started back in 2015, and our core premise was basically just make a Git client that doesn't suck, right? Because we were constantly running into issues onboarding developers onto Git. We had Windows devs and Linux devs and Mac devs, and everyone had to use a different client. There was SourceTree and there was Git extensions and there was Tortoise Git, and some people use the command line. So I just remember that the onboarding for even devs in our organization was really intense around Git. We had these 3-hour-long videos that we recorded on like how to get your system set up to use Git. And it was just like this painful experience that led to like, why isn't there a better client out there? Like, why is this so hard for us to get everyone onboarded onto Git? And right around that time, it was kind of like an inflection point where all of these technologies were coming together that helped us to be able to make a product that was cross-platform really easily. It was like Electron had only been out for a year or two. GitHub was making the Atom editor, which we all really liked using. So there was a good example of like kind of a broadly used product that was based on Electron. React had just become stable in 2015. VS Code came out later in 2015. So there's all of these things that were kind of coming together. They're like, okay, like we could make a cross-platform Git client based on all of these kind of like web-based tools to make something has a really nice user experience, and anyone that's on Linux or Mac or Windows could use it really easily. And that was kind of like the core premise when we started. And it's just a matter of timing, right? Like no one else had done this in the way that we were doing, and it just kind of took off from the beginning, even when we didn't have feature parity. So there was just something to be said about like creating a better user experience, even if it wasn't completely in parity with other Git clients or other Git tools, that I think people were looking for. Just some way to be able to intuitively understand what was happening in the repositories and interact with them.
I think also it's kind of, this shouldn't matter as much as it probably does, but it really looks good, as in aesthetically. One client I've used for years is SmartGit, and the functionality is amazing, and it does like it's really, really good, but it looks so outdated, and it's weird. It shouldn't matter.
It shouldn't, but
having a nice shiny GUI does make a big difference, doesn't it?
People like things that look nice, things that feel good, things that work. And if you're going to be using a tool every day, yes, it has to be functional, but I think that extra level of kind of UI and UX polish goes a long way. And it's funny, when we made GitKraken, we were the only Git client that had a dark mode. And for like developer tools, it was just kind of a like blatantly obvious, like, why wouldn't you have a dark mode? And I think honestly, we got a lot of traction just because we had a dark mode in the beginning. Again, even when we didn't have the functionality there to match other products.
Yeah, that's something too that's been common across GitKraken and GitLens, is just really to try to amp up the user experience to really focus on the design of it, make sure that it's really easy to use, intuitive as best you can. And yeah, I think that is a really important aspect. Props to Justin. Justin was involved very heavily, at the beginning of GitKraken and designed a lot of the UI. So yeah, it's been a great road there.
Yeah, anything without dark mode is a deal breaker for me. So it's kind of like all my windows now are in dark mode. And like if I'm in a Teams call and like the product owner or something shares the screen and it's like Jira in light mode and it's like, I've been blinded.
Yeah, I get that all the time when I switch to like, a Google Doc or something and that doesn't have dark. It's like, oh my God, I can't see.
I think another thing is kind of like I know a lot of IDEs like Visual Studio or Rider or whatever you use have Git integration. Like Rider's Git integration is absolutely amazing, but there's something to be said for having a dedicated app for it. I actually like being able to, in some senses, when I'm actually in the zone in Rider, I like being able to just commit there and then and not have to switch to another app. But in another, I actually like having a dedicated full GUI that's designed for Git, especially because sometimes I'm doing stuff in VS Code, sometimes I'm doing stuff in Rider. It really depends on what I'm doing. So I actually like having a dedicated application for that, really.
Yeah, it's interesting. GitLens is the most popular Git extension for VS Code and has a lot of that functionality in it. And recently, as GitLens has joined GitKraken, we've been trying to bring some of that kind of Git GUI functionality into VS Code by taking like the graph that we built for the GitKraken client, putting it into GitLens to try to find where that line is, where devs like to stay in an IDE and what they like to do in an IDE and what they like to do in a GUI. And it's been interesting watching, who likes to use those, who wants to use the visualized graph inside of an IDE and who prefers to switch to a client. And there's just varying degrees of who's willing to do what in which client or which type of environment. And I mean, the bottom line is everyone has all their preferences, and it's really hard to say like, this is the one way to do it.
I think also, if I think about me personally, I don't have a one particular preference. It depends on what mood I'm in.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'll just do it in the IDE where I am. Sometimes I'll switch to a terminal and just do it in the command line. Sometimes I'll switch to GitKraken. So it kind of like, that's the thing I like about Git actually. Whichever one of these you use is still Git under the hood. So it doesn't matter. You can hot swap between them. So I think that's quite powerful.
Yeah, jumping between the, a GUI and the CLI. I mean, I live in the IDE, but I do a lot of commands on the command line and I switch back and forth depending on what I'm doing. And yet, yeah, just being able to, just work with the underlying Git structure, visualize it when you need it, switch to the CLI when it's more convenient, and, back and forth is, yeah, definitely very valuable. And it's something too that, even from the beginning, I used Tortoise was the client that I used the most at the beginning because I could still do main stuff on the command line. And I did a bunch of work too with the Posh Git. So it was, a lot of enhancements to Git just in PowerShell and just being able to do most of the commands there. But then just, hey, if I wanted to do a log of history or I wanted to see what commits I had, I can just pop up a Tortoise Git window right from the command line, do what I wanted to do, click OK, and then I'm back to the command line. And just that interaction also led a lot of the combinations to building out GitLens to make it easy to flip between the two. And the GitKraken client is doing the same with the integrated terminal and to try to be able to flip between both of them depending on your mode of working. It's not all GUI all the time or all CLI all the time, right? It's this good mix in between for depending on what you're trying to get done.
Early in the days of developing the client, we were so focused on making a good GUI that we actually had like marketing campaigns that were like GUI versus the terminal and like why the GUI is better. And it's been interesting to see how our like thinking has evolved to like, who cares where you use Git? Like we can help you understand Git and interact with it better in any surface. And we just recently released a completely standalone CLI program that tries to do a lot of the things that we have in the client of interacting with workspaces and being able to kind of visualize your pull requests and issues inside of a terminal. And if that's where you prefer to work, well, then that's fine. Go do that work there. And it's been a cool journey to like grow to just saying like anywhere we can help devs work with Git. Doesn't matter if it's a GUI or in an IDE or in a terminal or in a web browser. We want to explore any possible way that we can help devs use Git.
Yeah, that's kind of like one of our mantras of meeting the developers where they are. So if it's in the IDE, we're covered there. If it's on the desktop, we're covered there. CLI, we're there. We want to do it on the web. We're launching GitKraken Dev on the web to bring that there. So I mean, we're trying to just sort of provide the tools and continuity on wherever you work and an individual dev may switch between those modes, or someone may work in only one. And, we'll just be there to provide really good tooling to, improve the productivity and collaboration across the board.
Well, I mentioned before about I really like the pull request integration, but because I'm not using like cloud workspaces, I'm probably only using a small feature set. If I'm using GitKraken and I'm in a team that does PRs and does this kind of stuff, but I'm the only one using GitKraken, can I still leverage that, or am I limited? Where I know the video we mentioned before, you showed off the GitKraken focus view, and you could see like across like lots of repos, all the PR statuses. You could pin them, you could snooze them, which look quite cool. Mm-hmm. Can I actually leverage this if the entire team hasn't bought into GitKraken?
Yeah, it's still a productivity feature for individual devs. From the beginning, we wanted to be not only cross-platform on whichever system you work on, but also like Git hosting agnostic, right? We didn't want to pick one tool and say like, we're only for GitHub or we're only for GitLab. So making sure that we have integrations to all of these hosting services, not only for Git, but also for issues, has meant that like our mindset has evolved to saying like, it's not just Git and writing Git commands. It's, pull requests. It's the issues that lead to opening a branch that lead to a pull request, and trying to find ways to weave all of those systems into one workflow. And the focus view and cloud workspaces are just kind of the next evolution of that thinking. If you're already connected to these services and you're pulling in information about pull requests, what can we do in all of our tools to help you focus on the issues, the PRs, the branches that you have open that are most important to you, that are most critical for you to kind of get done? And that's what the focus view is trying to do, is pull those all into one place and just give you like a single prioritized list of, this is the most important thing for me today and tomorrow and next week, so that you can kind of burn those down and use the integrations on all of our products to kind of follow on what's next and take the next step on getting that PR merged and that feature out.
So at the moment, I've created like a bunch, because I'm a contractor, so I've got different clients. I've created a bunch of different workspaces and profiles, which is a really cool feature. I really like that. I like the fact that profiles, the authentication with each of these integrations is per profile, so I can switch over between clients. I think that's really nice. But I've only been creating local workspaces. If I was to create a cloud one, if I did that against a client so I could see pull request stuff, is that focus view in my client, or is it going off to some GitKraken server that's like mediating it, some website or something?
It's just connecting you to the services that you have integrated. So it's going out to GitHub or Jira or the integrations that you have connected, and then pulling the data in and then showing that view to you.
On my machine?
Yeah, in that UI. So we're just going and fetching data about your pull requests and your issues. So when you create that cloud workspace, the only thing that we're storing is like the references to where we go get the information, and then we're just sending that to your client.
So any authentication stuff is staying on my machine?
Yeah, and the client today, yes.
Yeah, for the CLI and for GitLens, and we're starting to move more authentication to the cloud to enable a lot other features. But yeah, I think there will probably be a mix of, you'll be able to authenticate the cloud to take advantage of a whole bunch of other features, or just do local authentication. Yeah, and the GitKraken server is sort of involved for just storing the metadata about the workspace, which repositories are in it. And then if you're using pinning and snoozing, those are, we're storing data about sort of like a unique ID that we generate for the particular issue or PR that you pinned or snoozed. And then that's the data we're storing about that, so we can bring that back into that view. That's
really cool. I feel whilst I'm enjoying GitKraken, I feel I'm not leveraging half the functionality I could be doing. So I feel like tomorrow I'm going to be, no, I've got to take the kids to football, but I'll find some time tomorrow to have a play and see if I can set this up. But it does sound, as I say, watching that video where you were showing off like this focus view and being able to snooze stuff and focus stuff, that looks so powerful. So I'm looking forward to playing with that. I'll have to persuade the rest of the team to get onto GitKraken.
Yeah, and we're pretty early into that development. So any feedback, anyone that is using these and finds something that's like, oh, it'd be really nice if it did this, or if I could connect to this. We're listening really carefully to a lot of that feedback coming in now to try to hone them into the most valuable kind of features that we can offer.
Yeah, because we're just, I think it's just to mention, we're just getting started on that, the vision for that focus view. Like we really want to evolve it into much more of an assistant to help you prioritize things most effectively. We have very rudimentary ranking in the view today, and we're expanding that out and what things are most important to you. If we can go and look and say, hey, there's this really small PR, just needs a quick review. It's attached to a high priority issue, right? Like make sure that that's up there, get the review, or there's a PR that's already just waiting, just needs someone to click the merge button. Make sure that that item is sitting at the top of the list with a nice merge button, one click done, and you don't have to leave and jump to any hosting service to make that happen. So really just trying to really bring things together, but really focus on giving you, prioritization of what things that you should focus on to really increase your time to merge and productivity for your whole team.
So can I filter it and say, only show me really easy PRs? Don't show me anything complicated.
Not yet, but
we do have a PR complexity. We added a PR complexity kind of status. It's only for GitHub right now, but what we try to do is take in a bunch of factors and use some like heuristic system to say like, this is a really complex PR. So you might want to like get on it early or make sure that the right people are involved. Anything that we can do when we're connected to your hosting integrations or your issue integrations to help you hone in on the things that are one, most important, or two, like have a higher risk of potentially getting delayed, that's what we're trying to explore now is how can we really surface that stuff where before you have to bounce around, right? You have to jump to GitHub, you have to jump to Jira, and you're kind of juggling all of the states of these different things. And the idea behind what we're doing with the focus view is like putting it all into one place so you can just like process it and say, all right, what's at risk? What's going to take a long time? What can I just knock out really quickly? So you joke, but that's something that we've talked about is like, if there's just something easy that I can knock out, can I just go do that right now while I'm waiting for a build or something and just get it done?
Yeah, we definitely want to turn that into, even just like, Medium gives you a like time to read. Like this is like giving you a rough estimate of a time by, as we learn more and get more of this data of seeing how long it takes for these reviews, we can start providing better, accurate estimates on, what these things would look like. And we also want to take the concept of nudging, like doesn't necessarily have to be like, notifications are in your face, but just little things that just sort of guide you to the next steps or, like if a PR has this high complexity, well, we might want to nudge the author of like, hey, this is pretty complex. Why don't you break it down or provide a much better description that helps somebody go through the steps of like, how you're setting this up, provide better descriptions, that sort of thing. So just these sort of, nudges that can come in an automated fashion or even from other users to provide better communication and collaboration around those things.
Also, just going back to the actual client itself, like the log view. One thing I like, so I quite often I'm involved helping people less experienced in Git, like if they struggle with like a rebase or something, that kind of thing. And I quite like, even though most of the time I'm a keyboard shortcut person and try to reach for the mouse as little as possible, one feature I do like, which is a mouse feature, is the fact that you can like drag the branch tag in the log and you can drag it onto another branch. And then you get like a right-click context menu automatically, and you can choose to like fast forward, merge, or rebase or whatever. And I feel like when like explaining that and showing that people that are new to the concept of rebasing and stuff, just taking that and dragging it on top of another branch, that kind of helps them visualize it a bit better. I think that's quite nice.
It's interesting when I was talking earlier about like our whole onboarding to Git in the company. I remember specifically one of the videos that we showed to everyone to try to like onboard them to Git was someone describing branching with like Tinker Toys. So they had like this physical Tinker Toy model that they would build and like, okay, we're going to bring a branch and now we're going to like take that branch and we're going to rebase it on top. And there's just something intuitive about like, I mean, they were in the physical realm moving things, but like the dragging and dropping, the like contextual, like I'm taking this thing and I'm moving it on top of this thing that helps, I think, make those concepts click for people. And that was really the goal behind putting a lot of effort into that graph, making that kind of visual, not just look good and organize the information, but when it's interactable and you can drag and then just see like, what can I do in Git with these two branches that are related to one another and get a list of options, it uncovers a lot of what's possible in Git that you would normally have to go hunting for. Like, I want to try to do this thing. What's the command to do that?
I do wish there was I don't know whether it's classed as a bug or a missing thing, but if I do that drag and if I do it with a different branch, then I can choose fast forward merge. But if I do it like say main to origin main, fast forward merge is missing from the drop down, which I think I like quite often I would feel that if I have my hand on the mouse, I would like to do that fast forward. Otherwise, I've got to right click and say fast forward merge, but I like to drag it up almost. I can't remember whether I've reported a whole bunch of like little suggestions and things, so I might have already done that one. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's how we got connected with one another, right? You had a suggestion to us maybe on Twitter that, something wasn't as accessible as it could be or keyboard manageable, and that started the conversation. And I don't know if anyone's updated you, but we are in our release that's coming out next week, improving some of the things that you had suggested and just being able to navigate between panels inside of the client with the keyboard. So thanks for that suggestion. We do. And we have always been really interested in like listening to what customers and users say. We all have, Twitter threads in our Slack channels that we follow, so we know what people are talking about. We have a feature upvote, kind of a board for suggesting features that we look at very frequently just to get a pulse on like what the users are saying that they really want. And we do our best. Obviously, it's not possible to do everything, but we try to find the things that we can have the biggest impact on from what our users are saying that they'd like to see in the client. So appreciate that feedback.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. I had quite a good chat with Jeremy, and so I shared my screen and showed him like the gaps I found. And I think this goes back to before when I said that I tried it many years ago and then I just didn't stick. And I think it's because of there was a lot of like missing keyboard shortcuts. And watching quite a few of the tutorial videos, you can tell that people doing the tutorials is very mouse oriented, the way they're clicking through and everything. And it just felt like there was just a few extra shortcuts that would have bridged that gap. There was just a few little frustrations. And yeah, I jumped on the call with Jeremy, showed him kind of like where the gaps I found were. And I just don't think there were I think there's just a few extra hotkeys, to be honest. So yeah, it's awesome that that's coming so quickly.
Yeah, it's a challenge, I think, just accessibility in general, especially when you start a product that didn't have that as one of its primary goals, right? Like we kind of went really fast on this kind of UI focused GUI, and we were so focused on the UI and the clicking and dragging that like we just didn't spend time on keyboard navigation. So it's a challenge to try to catch back up to that, because when you build a system that isn't kind of expecting to do that by default, it's harder to do that. But counteract that or counterbalance that with GitLens and VS Code, which is something that is like, I don't know, Eric, if it was designed from the ground up to be keyboard accessible, but I know that that's a really big focus for them now, is just making sure you can do everything with the keyboard.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, keyboard accessibility is kind of baked in early, even just further than just keyboard, accessibility in general for screen readers and that sort of stuff it's been a thing at Microsoft for a while, but and so it was in that purview. But over the last at least 2-3 years, it's been a like really strong focus of VS Code is to really spend a lot of time on true accessibility, from contrast to screen readers to all that sort of support. And they've done a lot over the last couple of years to improve that. And so we take advantage of a bunch of that because we're in that space in GitLens. So it just becomes easy to play well in there. But then there's our own web views, the graph still is not at the level of accessible that we would like. And we're just, continuing to improve that. One thing is, as we start building out these, newer features or bring these features across the product, accessibility is, one of the priorities for us. Is we want to make sure things can be used by the biggest group of people, again, meeting the dev where they are. So, as we build out these, new components and stuff in, in the client, in GitLens, in the web, we're really baking that in from the get-go, which makes things a lot easier to continue to improve upon. But just keyboard access in general is something that we're going to be spending more and more time on to make sure that you can really easily navigate to getting to the actions that you're looking for.
Yeah, that makes quite a big difference. And as I say, I think it just feels like there was a few little gaps. There is keyboard shortcut support. So moving on to, we spoke about like the two different angles, like one as a product and one, what's it like to develop? I'm curious, like, so with Git, one topic that comes up quite a lot is like the different Git branching strategies. Like there's lots of different ones. I'm just curious to, like, you develop a Git client. What strategy have you landed on with developing GitKraken?
I think we have a couple across our products. I know the client specifically, the strategy that we've used, since the beginning, and I'm sure that this has kind of evolved because I don't hear as many people using it, is that we operate with forks. So everyone has an individual fork of the main repo, and they kind of work on those separate forks. And then when they're ready to merge into the main remote, they PR into the main. So we have like everyone with all of their different forks of the program. And so when you want to go check out someone else's branch, you have to have all of their remotes, which I think is sort of the opposite of the trunk-based development where everyone just works off of main, which I think that's probably how GitLens works, right?
Yeah, we're trunk-based. Yeah, committing to main is the normal mode. And, we have short-lived PRs for specific things to make sure that sort of thing. And then, we have nightly builds that go out to users every night to get feedback and pre-release. So it's definitely different cycles on how that is. And it's also easier, right? As teams are smaller, that is a lot easier to manage. I mean, they still can, VS Code for a very long time was trunk-based development as well. And only over the last year or so, they switched to a strong where devs can't commit directly to main everything that goes through a PR. So it's been an interesting change to see and watch. But there's lots of strategies there. But it's funny, like, ages ago, lots of things were all trunk based because, branches were super expensive. And then, Git came out and some of the others, Mercurial and Bazaar and a bunch of these others that were making, sort of the branching strategy basically free. And then it sort of proliferated in branches for everything. But then we find that it's challenging too. You get these long-lived things, you get branches that never get merged back in. It gets more and more challenging. And it feels like getting to really short PRs on a trunk based is coming around again as much more productive, just because you can move much more quickly and you don't have long lived things that you're constantly trying to merge or rebase to keep up to date with the main. But that's still definitely a challenge on how things stack on one another and all that sort of thing. So those are also areas that we're looking into heavily of how we can play well in that scenario, how those things work together to bring that together to make it easier.
Yeah, that's definitely a strategy I kind of taken, like trunk-based development with short PR branches. And then I think when you're doing trunk-based development, if you've got good test coverage, that makes a huge difference, that you can safely just deploy to main and then have that deploy be released as long as you've got good test coverage and feature toggles and things. Out of interest, I know you're talking about GitLens. Does GitKraken have like pre-release versions?
Not yet, but we're trying to follow in GitLens's footsteps. We have, internal development and staging builds, and we're trying to kind of refine our build system so that it's easier for us to do more frequent early releases and get feedback earlier in the cycle. Right now, we usually do a major release, a larger release once a month, but it would be really nice to get down to once a week and then once a day, just like GitLens does, to get that feedback earlier.
I suppose that was one of my observations. I think since I started using it, I think there's only been one update. I thought I've been using it longer than 2 months, so maybe I've had two, I don't know, and I didn't spot it. It does feel that would be more useful having because I've submitted a whole bunch of like bugs and feature requests, and just having that faster cycle and turnaround, which it sounds like that's what you're aiming for, which is quite cool. I know one tool I use, Todoist, for to-do lists. A couple of times a day I see just a little red dot in the top corner saying there's a new version, restart if you want to update. And so they're doing it literally all the time. And I think that's just such a nice flow where you're getting frequent fixes and things. And
having a kind of a pre-release or like an opt-in way to do that is one of the main reasons why we don't release more often with the client, because it's a 100 megabyte or whatever download, and we don't want to just be pushing that on everyone every day if they don't want to eat up their internet traffic that often. So definitely getting to like a mode or a version of the client that could allow people to opt into that is really what we want to get to before we start pushing releases out every day.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'll opt into that when it's out. That sounds quite cool. I'll go for the nightly builds, live on the edge.
Definitely. That's my dev tools are all living on the edge there. But I think one of the things that we're looking forward to is just not only just testing out our experiments, but just you could turn around fixes or turn around attempted fixes. That's something that is just the great feedback. GitLens is open source. We have a strong community of bugs coming in and feedback, and we try to be as active as we can on issues getting filed to go out try tomorrow's release. Did it fix it? And we get really good engagement on that, and it's great for the community, but it's also great for the product, right? We can sort of address things really quickly, get them out, get them tested, and everyone sort of benefits from that tight feedback loop. So that's one of the best things about working on an open source project is just that feedback loop is really rich. And we want to bring that into GitKraken and our other tools as much as possible. Feedback is crucial.
So making GitKraken open source?
That's probably not going to happen, but
I thought you'd say that somehow.
But just being able to report with the feature upvote, with just community, we have a community Slack where you can report things there, just trying to improve upon the feedback loops and the speed at which that those feedback loops can be closed, right? Like, so if something gets reported from Twitter, Slack, wherever, right, we can turn around and say, oh, well, hey, try that out in the next day, or, in a short period of time that's not in a full long cycle.
That's really cool. I didn't realize you had a Slack actually, so I'll jump on that. I think you mentioned earlier about integration issue, like tickets and stuff. I use Azure DevOps, and I couldn't see when I went to the issues drop down that there was. In fact, I've got it here actually in GitKraken, and it's got like a list of all the integrations, but it's not got Azure DevOps in there. I can use pull requests, but just not issues.
That should be working. Are you on cloud or self-hosted Azure?
Cloud, so Azure DevOps Cloud. So if I go to my pull requests, is it related to the workspace I've got? Because I've got a local workspace, even though I'm connecting to.
No, you should be able to switch. Actually, you know what? The Azure issues might only be working with cloud workspaces right now. They might not be available as a standalone issue tracker inside of the client yet.
Fair enough. I was just wondering, because I think I saw on the website as well that it mentioned issue support for Azure DevOps, so I guess that's the cloud one. But yeah, from our conversation earlier, it does sound like I could easily switch over, even if it's just me using it. That does sound good. I'm trying to think what else we've not covered. I'm just like, as I mentioned before, where I created a list of things I really like. One of the things I quite like is the solo view as well, which is quite nice. Just being able to say, I'm only working on this branch. Lots of my team have got lots of other feature branches. I don't want to see those. I just want to see my branch. And being able to solo multiple ones, I think that's really nice.
Yeah, it really cuts the noise out.
Yeah, definitely. I guess one thing, and this is another little thing I reported, but it would be nice if I solo a branch, it to automatically solo the remote tracking branch of the same branch, if that makes sense. Because I'm always having to.
Yeah, in GitLens, it does that. You can pick the current branch and it filters things to the remote and itself. I also have a branch that I've been working on the side of just a smart branching view where it will do that for the default branch. But if you're on a PR branch, it also pulls in the base branch that the PR wants to get merged into. So you have both the local, upstream, and the base. So that way you can see all those three to make it a lot easier to focus on exactly what you want. And so, yeah, we need to start bringing back some of those features into the client as well. And that's a feature too. We don't have in GitLens the soloing of a single branch other than the current. And so you can't just pick a random branch and do it. You have to go the opposite way of excluding branches. And so that's another area we're trying to bring back in to GitLens as well.
Yeah, it is quite nice to be able to clean things up. Another thing I quite like is when filtering, I can do the filter by authors, so I can select myself. And it doesn't get rid of everything. It doesn't filter by the author. All it does is dim out everyone else. And I actually really like that. Because when I first clicked on it, I thought it would just show my commits. But actually, it shows all the logs and just dims out everyone else, so I can really see what my commits are. And I think that's way better. That's really nice. Just being able to, one thing I use for quite a lot is if I've got my feature branch. So I'll be working my feature branch. It's been merged in. And I'm just looking back at all branches, and I want to say, has this been merged in? If my commits are more obvious and everything else is dimmed out, I can see much faster the merge commit for that branch. So I can say, oh yeah, so this is my feature branch. There's the merge commit. I can delete my local branch. So that's quite nice.
Yeah, we think that there's even a lot more that we can do with this graph that we have to make it more customizable, more filterable, to show other things that are really nice when you have a visualization. Like one of the things that we always talk about internally is like, could we do the same thing with just a PR kind of like branching view, right? If you just could visualize how all of the PRs are stacking up, would that be kind of a mode that this graph could switch into? There's a lot of opportunities to make the graph configurable to what it is that you're actually trying to see, and then maintain those interactions so that you can kind of take action on those things. It's something that's always on the top of our mind, and continuing to push beyond just what people expect from a typical Git graph inside of a GUI, really thinking about what we have the capabilities to show, especially with all the integrations and everything that we have access to really make a visual, interactive, and intuitive visualization of what's going on with everything that you're doing. So it's good to hear that you use those kinds of filters, because everyone has different opinions. Some people have come to us and said like, oh, I don't want to see everyone else's commits. I just want to see my commit. So it really starts to turn into this like, well, we might just make this a really powerful, configurable thing that, you know, you can tune it to what you want to see, and it will just show you the things that matter to you.
With the graph, when we extracted the graph from GitKraken Client to bring it into GitLens, so it was like rebuilding it in more of this component model to try to meet the needs there. And, as we were integrating it, building this, not a new component, but is a fork of it, really heavily changed. And then we started building in some new enhancements, features, adding on to the graph on what you can do, from dragging, dropping columns to compact modes to search results. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff we started adding into that component. And, over the last few releases, we've been bringing that component back into GitKraken Client. So now GitLens and the GitKraken Client and eventually other surfaces will also use that same component. So we're continuing to iterate, refine, add more of these features. And we still have experiments, things that we've tried in GitLens that we want to bring back, and vice versa, of just like, continuing to evolve the graph. Because as Justin mentioned, I think there's still an immense amount of features, and I don't just mean like checkbox features, but just different modes, different ways of visualizing that the data there that could have really profound effects on what you're trying to get done. One of the features that I really like about the graph in GitLens that we haven't yet brought back to the client is really rich Git searching. So you can provide, like a kind of like, your GitHub box where you can put a rich filter of like filtering issues and PRs. Well, you can do the same thing of like filtering authors or looking for changes or looking for specific files. And we go and highlight just the commits that affect those files or just have that change. And we have a little mini map that shows you where all those are, so you can quickly jump to where those things are. So like there's a lot of those features that I'm excited to have brought back into the client as well, and just continue evolving and iterating over that. Because I think there's just so much more that can be done on that visualization.
How do you manage, because I know there's the feedback.gitkraken.com where people can do suggestions and things and people can upvote. How do you manage priority? Obviously, you've got the upvotes to give you an idea. Do you just, as a team, pick what you think is the best next thing to work on? Or do you have like a process to choose what to focus on, what comes next?
Yeah, we all look at that and then blend it with everything else that we're trying to do, right? It's just typical project management. It's like we have all these features that users want. We have all these business needs, these things that we want to do to try to grow the business and evolve the products that we're building, and just trying to find the best mix of what we can do with the time that we have. The feature board that we have has really helped with that, because it does help things float to the top that are really important for users. One interesting thing about that board recently, though, is that some people are starting to abuse it now and like create bots that just go and like upvote. So if you're one of those people that's doing it, please stop, because it means that it's harder for us to actually see what people care about when everything just has 2,000 votes. And now we have kind of lost the context of what users really want. But yeah, it's a balancing act like everything.
Yeah. And one thing too is like getting this tighter feedback loop, right? And getting the engineers more involved in that feedback loop. Like once we have this nightly build, right, you're going to want to be more involved. Like if I've pushed a change, I want to be more involved to see if it fixed the user issue, right? It's not like, oh, we did that 3-4 weeks ago and now it's going to come in a couple of weeks later. It's like the tighter that feedback loop, the more involved you are in that. And then the way we structure our engineering cycles are, we're on this monthly cadence of releasing. And, so it's roughly a 4-week cycle. And for 3 of the weeks, it's kind of like 2 weeks of full on dev, 1 week of testing and stabilization, and 1 week of quote unquote debt. So like that debt week is engineers' time to work on anything to improve upon the product. Like it's not sort of demands from the organization. It's not, it's really just for the engineers to improve upon that. So there is, a quarter of this time is even outside of, product in the org saying, we should ship these features, or, like there's these really important upvote features. There's still a swath of time for just continual improvement, chipping away at really important items, improving keyboard accessibility. Like a lot of those sort of things are in that period of time.
I like the term when you said about blending, because I find like even with the podcast, for example, where I've got people asking me to be on the show, so I've got like a big backlog of guests and stuff, but then I've got episodes I want to have on and stuff. And that's such a great term, like blending the different things in. But yeah, it's managing different priorities, even within a business with clients I work for. You can feel you mentioned about like tech debt, working on tech debt and stuff, and more like infrastructure stuff where like the devs want to, we want to do this, but then the business might say that they've got UI changes they want to make, and they're fighting saying, well, you can't spend time on this tech debt stuff because we want these business stuff. And it's kind of like just finding that right balance. It's always quite an interesting mix, I guess.
Yeah, and it's hard because there's not infinite resources to do whatever you want. You have to pick and choose, and that's a really hard thing to do.
Yeah, and there's no right answer, is there? One other thing, like going back to your video that you did, one thing you spoke about was something called cloud patches. And one thing I really liked is that there's a button saying share merge conflict. So that just made me laugh, like share the pain.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that, especially, earlier we were talking about kind of the noise generated in trunk-based development sometimes when everyone has branches that they're all pushing to main. Like cloud patches are a way for us to explore how we might help devs collaborate earlier on code that without the kind of like noise of pushing branches to the repository, right? So cloud patches, stemmed from hearing some of our customers that actually use patches every day, which is still surprising, but there are companies that work this way. They share code with patches, they email them back and forth to each other, and that's like how they collaborate on code. So we thought like, could we just make that process easier and streamline it? So if I have some code that I'm, maybe not comfortable pushing up to a branch, or I just want to get some feedback from a senior dev on, can we facilitate that sharing process in a much easier way that's a little more private, that doesn't have to be pushed up to a main branch between 1 or 2 or 3 developers? And that's what Cloud Patches, at its core is trying to do, is just really say, I have some code, doesn't have to build, doesn't have to do anything. It might just be a list of to-do comments in all the files that I need someone to go look at. I can just really easily package that up and just send it over to someone. And if they're using any of our tools, they see that pop up and they can go access it. They can review the code. They can, respond to it or merge it or do whatever they want with that cloud patch. So yeah, like at the core, that's what cloud patches are, just this like way to make it easier to, as frictionless as possible and as privately as you want to as possible, share and collaborate on code with someone else. And there's a lot of implications that we're exploring on like what that can enable. And the merge conflict resolution is something that we hear constantly. We have people that really like our merge tool in GitKraken Client. It's very visual, it's very intuitive, but there's still times where people say like, I have to open up a video chat with another dev to show them my merge conflict and help me resolve it. And so one of the use cases that we're exploring with Cloud Patches is like, well, if you get into this state and you don't know how to resolve it, could you just package that up as a patch and send it over to someone who could get their repo into the same state, fix the conflicts, and then just respond back to you with another patch, and you go apply that, and now your conflict is resolved. That seems like it would solve a really large amount of pain that we hear from users all the time. And we think that it could have a really huge impact on, again, that ability to collaborate on code that isn't kind of inherently built into any systems that we have, but is technically possible.
When I watched your video and saw it, initially I was thinking, well, why not just use branches? Because it sounds like you may as well use branches. But as you were saying it then, I'm kind of thinking that, because you mentioned about share it privately, I was thinking actually, because like a lot of the stuff I work on is a small team where it's kind of like, it's a private repo. Where I guess if you're doing like open source development and stuff, where if you did do a branch, it's public, then this is perfect if you can just privately share something and it not be a public branch on the open source Git repo.
Yeah, it definitely gives you that ability. But even if it's not open source, right? You just may work on a large team, and there is just inherent human interactions, right? Like I really only trust Justin to look at this before it goes to the wider team because I don't want to be judged harshly. And whether that's good or not is a different story. But the reality is dynamics like that happen, and we really want to enable really early collaboration. Right? Because if devs communicate and collaborate on code really early in the process of just throw it over, it's like, here's pseudocode of where I'm thinking about going with this. Does this structure look good? And that sort of thing, just continuing to evolve that will end up with a far better PR at the end, that it will get merged a whole lot easier and just far quicker as well. And you won't get to the stage that happens a lot is something shows up at PR time and you're like, we really should have done this in a different way, or we really want to go back, but sunk costs are a real thing. So it's like, okay, well, maybe we'll just merge this and we'll eat the debt later, and those sort of challenges. So the more we can collaborate, and if starting small with one trusted partner enables that collaboration way earlier in the process, and then just be able to expand the circle very easily, or jump right to a branch or to a PR and continue that flow is something that we really want to enable.
Yeah, that's quite nice. I like definitely bringing collaboration earlier, and I found doing pair programming makes a massive difference with that. But I don't like pair programming all the time because I find that's full on. If you, one client I worked for a couple of years back, it was 100% pair programming, and that was just really full on. So this kind of feels like still allowing you to bring that collaboration sooner, but you're not always in a call, always pair programming. You can bounce things backwards and forwards. So yeah, I like it.
Definitely brings the async nature into it as well. It's it doesn't have to be right then and there, and we're looking at many different flows of where it can apply. Even we're looking at suggesting changes to an existing PR rather than just purely reviewing it. If I could just go in my code editor, make the changes that I'm suggesting, I have all rich IntelliSense. I can compile if I, any of that sort of thing, and I can package that up as a set of changes, because I don't really want to commit my changes back to your branch, because then they'll be live and go with this. It's far less a suggestion if I'm committing it back. And, so being able to apply that, make that really easy to then accept those suggestions, take part of it, and because it's just a patch you can pull down, partial that. And so we're really just trying to improve that experience as well.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So I'm aware we're kind of quickly running out of time. We're actually, I don't know if you've got a hard stop on the hour. So before we do wrap up, shall we do dev tips?
Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. So one thing that I had, I'm really interested in these large language models and how they're, just changing so much of what we're doing, especially in the dev space, but just overall. And there was a great YouTube video by Andre Karpathy, who's at OpenAI. And it was just it's this intro to large language models on YouTube. And it's it's about an hour-long video, but it's a really accessible video to kind of anyone. And it just gives you sort of this intro to how they work, the different modes, to where they can go, and some of the even security and vectors to attacking them as well. So it's a really interesting talk. Definitely impressed by it. So I would definitely check that out.
It's funny, I've actually got that in a browser tab open. I'm 8 minutes and 49 seconds into it. I obviously got pulled away from the kids, but it's in a browser tab so I can finish it. But yeah, you could tell from starting this is going to be good. But yeah, I should juggling too many things. But I will definitely include that in the show notes.
Awesome.
Yeah, mine is something that I saw on LinkedIn just a day or so ago, and so I can share the link with you to it. But it's a post from Brad Frost, who's the person who kind of pioneered or developed the whole atomic design, atomic components kind of philosophy. So he's kind of bridging the gap between design and development, which is a space that I'm really interested in. And the specific post was talking about how important it is for devs and designers to communicate, right? Not have this kind of wall that things get thrown over or kind of tossed back and forth between, but talking about how critical it is for devs and designers to be more on the same page throughout the entire development process, because it just makes things a lot easier. It keeps everyone from wasting time, and it really informs each of those groups like what the struggles of the other is, right? Like when designers know how difficult it is to build something, that helps inform the things that they're designing. And when developers know kind of like what the design process is, the more you can bring those in sync, ultimately I think products come out the better for it. So I can share that link to that post, but it was something that I just read recently that really resonated with me as someone who's kind of lived on both sides of the kind of design and development space.
It's quite interesting you hear a lot about devs and operations and the wall and everything, and QA as well. Like just bringing, like as you say, designers, the QA team, operations, all of those people together to collaborate and do this sooner rather than later, because the later you leave it, just like with Git branches, you can get divergence with long-lived branches. If people don't communicate, people diverge, have separate ideas of what's going on, and then it's much harder to bring that together like later down the line.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, definitely. Not everyone has to be a developer, but just keeping the teams together, right? Like having strong cross-functional teams rather than walls between them. It's like it doesn't happen for design and then dev and then QA and test to DevOps. Like the more that you can unify that into one team that's working together, it just up levels everyone and you far better outcomes.
Yeah, definitely. So my dev tip is I was just trying to find something that was on topic. And I know a lot of people that use Git but haven't used it that much don't know about the ref log. And this has saved me quite a few times. It's a log of a lot of things that happen in Git, like which is much more granular than just the commits that you see as you go. And quite often, like if you completely screw up and think you've lost something, you've done a Git reset or something, or you've done something which you think you've lost all your commits, there's a good chance if you've committed it at some point, it's still in the ref log. And a lot of Git users that maybe haven't spent time trying to learn Git, I've probably never heard of it. And I think just knowing this exists means that you can be more relaxed about doing things like rebasing, which to some Git users, that's scary, which actually that should be a fundamental thing that everyone knows how to do. But I think just knowing you've got this backup as the ref log, I think that's good to know.
Yeah, and I think that we make use of that with our undo feature. So like the client has the ability to undo, and I think what we're doing is we're going back through the ref log and saying like, well, where were you before? Well, we'll just take you back to that point in time.
I didn't even know you had an undo feature. Is that just Control Z or something?
I think Control Z, and there's a button in the toolbar for undo. And it will tell you if it's possible or not, depending on what you've done in the past. But
I feel really dumb now because there's it's like right up there in the center of the toolbar, a big button saying undo, and I've just not seen it. I think because I use keyboard shortcuts, I don't even look at the toolbars. I just like learn the shortcuts and then do those. That's quite cool. That's really nice. Cool. So before we wrap up, where's the best place for listeners to reach out to you if they've got any questions? I know you've mentioned the Slack. I can put any links as well that you mentioned in the show notes too.
Yeah, we have our GitKraken Slack channel. We have GitLens, is an open source repo that has discussions and comments and issues that you can suggest on there. We have feedback.gitkraken.com, which is where we have all of our features for the client that we listen to users' feedback on. So you can suggest things, upvote things, comment on things there. And then, we also have Twitter, which is where I think you reached out to us on. So we're all over the place, wherever you can find us.
We also have while the CLI is not yet open source, it should be coming, but we do have a repo on GitHub that is for issues and reporting, and that's where the releases also happen until we get that fully open source. And I think the same for our browser extension, which should also be open source in the near future.
Very nice, very nice. Well, cool. Well, just thank you both for joining me. Thank you for GitKraken as well. I'm really enjoying it, and thank you for joining me on the show.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Awesome.
You're welcome. And thank you everyone for listening. And a quick reminder that this podcast is sponsored by Everstack, which is my own company providing software development and consultation services. For more information, visit everstack.com. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please do help me spread the word on social media. I normally use the hashtag #unhandledexception, and I can be found on Twitter, X, at Dracan, which is DRACAN. But the best place to get in touch is on Discord, and we'll include links to all the things we've mentioned today in the show notes, which can be found on unhandledexceptionpodcast.com.